There we are. Okay. To make sure I was actually live. Good afternoon, everyone. So I am going to recreate a card that I actually made for the Rainbow Stamper's birthday. And I thought I would share how to make this. Now, full disclosure, I made this with Pedal to the Metal. My son loves, not necessarily dirt bikes. He's not a dirt biker, but he does like, let's show you this part here, the ATV. So I made him a card with the ATV, and then I just put the dirt bike on the front, which he thought was pretty hilarious. So I thought instead, maybe you do or don't have that stamp set, so you could use that, but you could also use Campology. So I'm actually going to use the tent. So for the base and the main components of the cards, I'm going to actually use Mountain Air. Hi, Connie. Thanks for joining me. All the way from Denmark. How sweet of you. Thank you. So I have a couple things that I did ahead of time with this card. So this will be a little bit helpful for you. Hi, Denise. Hope you're well. I have a piece of masking paper, and I actually cut the mountain range die out with the masking paper. Now, masking paper is kind of like a huge Post-it note. Stampin' Up! Does not carry masking paper, but you could either use a really large Post-it note. You could also use Post-it tape to cut with. A company that I get masking paper from, I can link to on my blog post when we're finished, but I use this. It's reusable, so you can use it over and over. So I'm going to just use this piece. I also cut a piece of, just a scrap piece of white paper, and this is for the die that has the tree line. So I'll show you that. So this is the tree line. So it has a stamp and then a coordinating piece, and I think this matches right there. So I just picked a spot and did it because it's a really long die, which is great if you're doing a wide card, but since this is a narrow card, I just did it on a smaller piece. So I have that ready as well. Now you could also, if you wanted to, add in some trees in the background. So these dies cut out really, really thin trees. So you could add another component, and I'll show you what I mean. If you wanted to do something, maybe with something in the background more of tree related, you could cut out some trees. Again, these are pretty thin pine trees. I know I've done a lot of videos with these before. It's a great die. It's a great die set. It's also a great stamp set. The nice part about the stamp set also is it's reversible, which is cool. But you could put trees in the background and then maybe do the mountains, but I wanted the mountain to be the highest part of this card, so we did that first. So I'm going to show you how to do this. It's quite simple. It looks like it has a lot to it, but actually it's not really all that bad. The only thing that you will need, and I'm going to move just 2 of these stamps out of the way, is you're going to need some really large stamps. So you can see these are some long photopolymer stamps. So for these, I actually used, and I think this one's too small, you're actually going to use probably one of the blocks that you don't use very often. This is I. So this mountain range has details on one side, oops, and then the other side you can actually flip it if you wanted like a shadow background stamp and then do the detail. They don't match up exactly, but you can kind of line them so they, I don't want to say that they mimic each other, but they kind of will shadow and then it'll be opposite. So it really works for a cool layout if you do it together, but you can reverse them. So I'm going to put that on here because we are going to do the detailed portion. And then I also did the trees. So I'm going to use the same stamp again. Same thing with the trees though. You can do this so you have a more muted, just a shadow of the trees, and then the trees are very detailed on the top. And actually the coolest part is it even gives you some land. So you could take this like it was a like a riverbed. You can make it kind of into grass. So it's very versatile. This stamp is super versatile, which I really like as well. And then the other thing I think I'm going to do, so I was going for something similar because we don't really have a lot of truck stamps currently, or maybe I just don't have them. But I figured the camping would be really cool, so doing the tent. So the tent is going to be the most close portion of my card. So hopefully that all makes sense. So I'm just going to get this ready. That way I don't forget that. And the other thing is you could either use a sentiment from here. So we have great, enjoy today, happy trails, you brighten my path, or explore. Or if you wanted to, you could leave it blank and use it maybe later for a masculine card. So the other thing you could do if you wanted to add a little something to this and you didn't want to do the mountains, you could also stamp the trees from this stamp set as well. So we're just using the tent thus far. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to move this over. I'm going to flip you down so we can get started stamping. I am going to do everything today on thick basic white. And the reason I'm using thick basic white is because we're going to actually make a scene and then we're going to layer it onto another card. So you can see with this, what I did is it made it really nice to go all the way to the edges, and then just going to lay it onto another card base. And the other thing is I did add a little bit of dimension because we have a layer here and then another layer on top of it. So it was pretty simple to make it a very multi-dimensional card without really a lot of effort, because I didn't put any dimensionals. I just laid them all flat. So I'm going to flip you around. Thank you all for joining me today. I know I haven't been on any regular schedule whatsoever, so I do appreciate you just popping in with me. And I have another project I'm working on there, which is probably why you see all those 8,000 Stampin' blends. Okay, so move this down. So again, we are using Mountain Air and Campology. And to get started, I have a piece of thick, pretty sure that's my thick white. Nope, that's not it. Thought it was thick white. And we're just going to use that one piece because I will just use the base. So I'm going to go ahead and cut a piece that's going to measure 4 by 5 1/4, and then the other half will just be the base card. So 4 by 5 1/4. And then while I have this one here, I'm going to just trim this down to 4 1/4. And, excuse me, and score this at 5 1/2. So base, and then this layer is going to go on top. So we're going to work with this layer. We will need an additional layer of green, which I'm probably going to just pick a color to stamp onto, and then we'll go from there. So for these mountains, I kind of went with this color scheme of kind of green. So I have the forefront is the dirt, and then we have kind of the mountains in the back. So you could go with green. You could also go with blue if you wanted to. I think that you got a really good contrast between the green and the blue here. So I guess it kind of depends which direction you want to go. But for something different, let's go with shaded spruce. So I'm going to do that. And just kind of picking a point. So you can see this is kind of like the upper third of the card. And it kind of depends on if you want this to be really bold or not. So I'm just going to show you the difference before we actually put this on our card. So first generation, second generation. So you kind of have to figure which way do you want. If you want it to be really vividly green, but I almost like the stamped off because you do get a little bit better detail. So I'm actually going to go with stamped off. So let me just wipe this off just a smidge, get a little bit of that excess ink. And then in order to make sure this isn't too gummy, I'm actually going to flip the stamp over, and I'm just going to tap with my pad so I don't over ink it. That's probably good. Put this away so I don't make a mess. And I'm going to stamp this off. And just kind of eyeballing. Looks pretty good. Because you can always trim the bottom up too. As a matter of fact, I think that's what I did. Okay, so here's our top. Now I'm going to give this a second to dry. And while I do, we can stamp the tree line. So I'm just going to grab my tree stamp. So same thing again, you have a detailed side and you have a side that's just, I don't want to say it's blank, but it's plain. So we're just going to pop this on. And I think I'm going to kind of stick with the same color scheme. So what I did was, this is on, I could be wrong, maybe this is on white. Oh, I did do it on white. How you like that? This is on white, but for something different, let's try stamping on pear. This pear, yep, and that one is 4 inches. So I'm just going to use this scrap because we don't really need a full piece. And I'm going to stamp, instead of pear, I think I'm going to go with Old Olive because I want it to be just a little bit darker. So this one I'm going to stamp on full strength. Okay, and again, I'm going to move this over. I kind of want it just close to the top, only because worst case scenario, in case I don't like it, we can always trim. Okay. It's a little bit dark, and I almost wonder, I want to see one thing, if it would look a little bit nicer. I'm going to just check one thing really quickly. So sometimes this is kind of a nice thing to do. I'm going to flip this over here so I don't mess it up. I'm stamping off, and I'm going to go to the other side. All right, so this one's a little bit lighter, but I kind of like the dark inking a little better. So it just kind of depends on what you want to do with your detail. I'm going to go with the first ink side. So again, this was Old Olive, and we stamped it onto Pear Pizzazz. So I'm going to wipe this one off really quickly. And then, let me scoot this over, just in case we need to do something else. And, oops, that's what I wanted to grab, my die. So I'm going to pull out the tree line. And what you're going to do with this, so I just have some purple tape to kind of hold this in place. It's easiest if you kind of take it apart and figure out where your tree line is. And you can kind of tell from this little grouping right here of trees. And I try to bring it down a little bit more than I think I need. And I'm just going to put my tape on. And then I'm going to run this through my die cut machine. And it's just going to take off that little bit. And at the bottom here, we can kind of make this as green as we want it to be because it doesn't need to be the whole part. Because if you see, we have our mountains. So it'll kind of be like this, mountains, trees. You can bring it down a little bit if you want, up a little bit. And this part down here we can trim off. But before we do that, I want to add a little bit more color. And we only ended up losing this little piece here. Okay, so I am going to grab, let's see, I'm just going to use one of my cheaper ones for the bottom, and then we'll use a nicer one where we're blending here at the top. So I just want to make sure this is dry before we do any blending, just so we don't smudge the edges, okay? So I'm going to go with Pear Pizzazz and a blending brush. Hi, Kathy. Thanks for joining me. Hi, Amy, Patricia, and Jill. I'm just picking up a little bit of ink, and I just kind of want to blend so there's a little bit of color blended down here. Okay, and then I'm also going to hit it a little bit at the top, just to kind of blend this top bit of tree and the green cardstock. All right, and then I'm going to grab one a little teeny bit darker. So that was Pear Pizzazz. I stamped with Old Olive. I think I'm going to do a teeny bit of Mossy Meadow. So since I'm staying in green, I'm going to be okay with going from a lighter green to darker. But if you don't want to, you could use a different brush. Just want to add just a couple bits of shading. Doesn't really need to be a lot. Just for a little bit of depth with the different colors. Okay, so that was Mossy Meadow. And this, what you're going to need to do, so with this or with the Stampin' Up! Version, basically when you're finished with it, if you rinse it out and let it fully dry, it will come almost completely clean, but it will be clean enough that you can use it on any color. So what I typically do is I will kind of rub out the rest of the ink on a cloth, and then I'll rinse it out afterwards. Make sure this one looks... Yeah, this one's still a little bit blue, so I'll use that. So this is going to be our second layer. Now, in the meantime, I'm going to grab my mask that I'm reusing, and I'm just going to, the best I can, line this up. The only thing you want to do is, and I'm going to show you, you can see right here. On this very first one that I did, I actually went over a little bit too high, so I had a white edge, which kind of looked cool, but also I think I'd rather go under. So I'm going to go just a teeny bit down. So that's just a little bit too low. Okay. So I'm just pressing for this to hold, especially at the top ends. I'm trying to make sure my finger isn't green because that's the last thing you want. All right, so what I did was I started with a little bit of Balmy Blue, which this still has some Balmy Blue on it. So I'm gonna, before I even dip, I'm gonna just see what's on here. So I'm just using my blender brush. Now, this right here alone just happens to be the way I inked it. If it has these little white spaces, it almost kind of looks cool because it gives you a little bit of cloud edging. So the bottom looks really nice. So I'm actually not going to do anything else around the edge there. I'm going to be super careful. And it worked out really nicely that I didn't even need this. But I am going to get a little bit of navy. And I just want to make just the edges a little bit darker. So, hey, Fran. How are you doing? Thank you so much for stopping in. So just a little bit of navy, and I'm just going to stick to the kind of the edge. I have like that mountain western sky. Okay, that's good. So I don't want too much. You could also go with Pacific Point would be another nice blue, depending on what you want your sky to look like. So at this point, I'm going to move my mask back over here because I will use it again. We're going to have that. We're going to have our trees, but I kind of want to blend the bottom of this. This is the one we use the green on. So I'm just going to blend a little bit. Now remember, we went to a different color green. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to clean this off really well. And I want to add a little bit of a lighter green. So I think I'm going to go back in. I think I'm actually going to go to Soft Succulent. And I want to pick up a little bit of green. Let's see what this looks like. Yeah. This is pretty light. So I'm just going to go over the bottom of the mountains, which will kind of blend in a little bit of that green that we stamped with, which is okay. And Soft Succulent. Just blending the edges. And if you get a little bit up into the sky, it's not going to really matter. Let's just go down just a little bit lower just in case. Because all we're really wanting to do is just to cover, that way it's not like that harsh white line. And one other thing I noticed, I have a teeny little bit of hangover here from when I cut. So I'm just going to smooth that out because I don't want a little piece sticking up. So there's that. All right, so we have that part. Now, for our bottommost portion, this is kind of something that's going to be dependent on what you want to do. So when I did this, I actually did this on soft suede, and I stamped with Early Espresso. We're going to have to see what our tent looks like first, because we might want a darker tent, we might want a lighter tent. I have an extra little piece of white here, so I'm just going to stamp the tent, and I think I'm going to do the tent in Early Espresso. I just want to see what it looks like. You could also do this with black. That actually doesn't look so bad. So while I have this, I'm going to grab a blender pen that has not been used in black or white. Okay. And I'm just going to very softly bring some of that ink down because it's still slightly wet from stamping. Just kind of adding in the shadow where I need it. And I'm actually going to go outside the lines just a little bit. That way if I decide to overcut, because I don't think I'm going to have the little strings, but it will kind of blend a little bit better. Kind of filling in some shading. Looks pretty good. And I want to bring in my soft suede marker, to give a little grounding to this. and adding in just a teeny bit more shading. I want to do one more thing. You don't want to overwork your paper with your blender pen because it can make it a little bit pilly. But the only thing that this may or may not be up your alley, kind of same with this, is I did fussy cut this. So I'm going to fussy cut it, which is kind of why I went over the edge just a little bit in case I need to bring in the edge slightly, because I don't really know what I'm going to do with this in the background yet. Okay, so here's our tent. Again, we cut out the stakes, so you kind of got to figure if you're going for something, I guess, that you think is going to look super realistic, you probably might not want to cut off your tent strings or whatever it is you call them. I'm clearly not a camper, so I don't really know. Okay, and there's that. All right, so I have our tent, and the only other thing we need is a little bit of soft suede. So I'm going to trim this, and I only need a small piece. So again, I'm going to trim it to 4, and I'll show you what I did. This was really quite simple. I probably only need about like maybe a 3, I'll say a 4-inch piece. It probably doesn't even need to be that big, but a 4-inch piece. And then I'm actually going to do this opposite. So it's going to be, instead of it going up this way, I'm going to have it go up this way. So I'm just tearing the edge. And remember, if it's not the way we want it, we can always trim it off at the bottom. So no big deal. But I wanted the tent to kind of be up here at the top. So we're definitely most likely going to have to trim something. And then finally, one more time, I'm going to grab my early espresso. This is where the tire tracks from the stamp set really came in, because I kind of made it look like it was muddy. So this way is going to be a little bit softer. Early espresso is a pretty potent ink. So just remember, you might want to start off light, because you can't really take it away. You could always flip it over and start again. But I just want to add a little bit more here at the top. Okay, that looks pretty good. Just like that. So we're going to definitely trim some of that off. And while I have this out, I'm going to kind of just eyeball where I'm going to put this. We're going to go like that. This piece is going to go here. We're going to have our tent. Where did it disappear to? I'm going to move this down just a smidge here. And then kind of right at the bottom, I think I'm going to say, enjoy today. And I'm going to just stick that again in espresso, which I know is dark. You could also do it in black. Let's see. Okay, that looks pretty good. If we had something else that was kind of grounding or floor-like, we could certainly add it in on the bottom, so we had something, you know, kind of something in relation to how we have the tracking here, but we don't, so we'll leave that out for now. All right, so that looks pretty good. And the other thing I wanted to tell you that I did that looks a little different here, so I did end up doing this on thick white, and the reason I know is when I was filling in my land and I had this white piece that showed up, I actually added a little blue so it kind of looked like water. So if you wanted to skip the green and just stick with white, and white, that would totally work out in your favor, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to just put this together. I did use a very strong adhesive for this because I didn't want it to come apart, so I used Stampin' Seal Plus. And I know this is this little crazy curve here, so I'm going to just kind of cut that off. And I'm not being really precise because it's going to have another layer on top of it. So I'm just going to go across best I can straight and throw that away. So like that. It's pretty good. Pressing it. Okay. And then we have this. So this we're going to definitely need to trim off so it matches up to that. But it can go down significantly because the bottom of our card is right here. So we have the bottom of the card, we have our tent. So again, if you wanted to, you could add some trees or something else to it, but I sometimes feel like I don't like to overdo things. I feel like I do a little too much. So I'm actually going to, let's just kind of eyeball this. Just use a black pencil. That looks about right. That's probably about good. So I'm going to go ahead and trim this. Straight across. And since we went on to soft suede paper, we don't have to worry about any harsh lines. Okay, let's see. Just like that. Looks pretty good. Okay, so I'm just going to put some adhesive on the back of this to make sure it stays. I am going to try to make sure I get adhesive all over. There we go. Oh, everybody's home. All right, so that lines up perfectly right on there. Okay, and then, so this would have been the one thing I could have added to this, and if I would have thought of it ahead of time, I would have totally done it, is a wobbler. Would have been great for that, but instead, I'm just going to go with some dimensionals for the tent. So the only thing that's really getting dimension on this is the tent. We're just going to pick a place to put it. Right here looks good. And if you wanted to, you could even take your soft suede. I wouldn't do this with espresso. I think it would be too dark. And you could kind of put some little, like it's almost as if you had like some footprints or some dirt, just to add a little texture. Push that just a little bit. There we go. Just a little bit of texture to it. And then finally, we're going to just mount this onto a thick white card base. Hey, buddy. So I'm just going to wipe my fingers off because I always end up somehow accidentally putting my hand in something and then it's going to have ink on it. So this is our base. So I'm going to take this just to make sure I don't goop it up and fold it out of the way over here. I'm going to fold my card base. Now, you could, if you wanted to, pop this whole thing up onto dimensionals, but quite honestly, I think the way it frames it out with the white, it almost would not be as cool of a card if it was popping off of it, because the white base with the card kind of helps it pop. So since we did put a bunch of layers on here, I hate when that happens. Sometimes, I don't know, is it just me? Sometimes this, I think I must be pressing too hard. I am forever somehow ripping my cardstock. I think I treat this almost too much like it's the old roller. God, and just the sound of that makes me bleh. That's why I don't tend to use the tape runners as much anymore, because they really are always eating my cardstock. Does that happen to anybody else but me? All right. Now the other one, I think I might have used a very, a 1/4 of an inch smaller base, because this does have a little bit thicker of a, nope, that does look pretty close. So I do have a difference again in the greens. This one I stamped on white. This one I stamped on green instead. So it kind of depends. But again, we have the inside, and then we could do something similar for this. So for the inside of this card, if you wanted to continue it, you could do the coffee pots, you could do the lantern. But I think another thing that would be really cool is if we're going to stamp this image, but we're going to stamp it off before we do it, so it's a really soft image on there. So let me just pick up my stamp. And I don't want this to be super dark. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to use Evening Evergreen, but I'm going to stamp it off first. That way it will kind of be on the side, but you could still write over it. So hopefully it's going to work out the way I want. So Evening Evergreen. If you have the stamp set that had the truck, that would be another cool one you could do. So many different things. So I'm just kind of trying to keep this down towards the bottom left. There we go. That looks pretty good. and that needs to be cleaned. And then again, if you wanted to add another sentiment to the inside, you could certainly do that as well. But I think it's kind of a fun way with the mountains to just be able to build a scene. And I really love this card. I think it turned out super cool, but I almost like the cloud lightness of this, and almost the way it is, it's the navy and the blue almost kind of fill in a little bit of a purpley where it's like a Northern Lights. I really like it. But again, you can see here, so this is totally what I mean, the white line here. So if that's something that bothers you, you could always go back with your blender pen, and I'm going to show you again what I mean before I do it. So we'll just kind of rub, make sure we don't have too much color. But you can even go to just the lightest edge. So there's not any fresh ink on here, and just blend at the very edge of that if it's something that bothers you, and it will darken it just a teeny bit, but it kind of almost gives you like a horizoned illusion behind it. So I guess it's just depending on how you like to look at your cards, right? If you want them to be absolutely perfect, or if you're trying to go for something that's like a little bit more expressive in nature. Maybe that's a good way to put it. But I think both of these are super fun. I hope we come out with something like this again, because, you know, little boys love these type of cards, and I have plenty of these that are retired, but I would love to be able to get some new ones. And typically I think in the spring we may have something in the bigger catalog that I might have just overlooked. So if you happen to notice, let me know, because I'll order it. I always love doing those kind of cards because Christian loves those kind of cards as well. So thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate it. Oh, Melanie, you got to join in. See, look how fast, look how fast I got there. No, this grid paper is, I got it a while ago. I don't know, maybe we ran out and we have only a different kind of grid paper. This could have been one of the demonstrator grid papers, so you might have to look in that different spot anyway. But thank you guys so much for joining me. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your weekend, and I will see you all real soon. Thank you so much for watching.